There is, first of all, the very meaning of the word science. We are, of course, free to define science any way we wish as long as we are consistent, and, in fact, much of this science and religion argument consists of nothing more than a jockeying for definitions selected in advance to produce precisely the conclusion desired. Thus, for instance, if you define science simply as knowledge, then contemplative religion becomes a form of science, becomes, in fact, the highest science. This approach is often taken by present day Eastern masters who continually speak of the science of yoga, the science of meditation, the science of creative intelligence, and so on. Physics then becomes a branch of that all-encompassing tree of science, and we're off and running with the medium, the mystic, and the physicist. On the other hand, if you define science as empirical sensory knowledge instrumentally validated, then virtually all forms of religion become non-scientific. You then have one of two paths open. One, view religion as a perfectly valid form of personal faith, values, and belief not open to scientific scrutiny. These are said to be two different but equally legitimate domains between which there can properly be neither conflict nor compromise nor parallels. Two, view religion as non-scientific in the purely prerogative sense, as a superstitious relic of magical and primitive thinking, or a defense mechanism expiating guilt and anxiety, or an opaque ideology institutionalizing alienization, or a debilitating projection of men's and women's inward and humanistic yearnings, or a purely private emotional affair harmless in itself but not deserving the title knowledge. Now, all of that confusion, you see, rests in large measure on how you define science. The issues are so complex and subtle that if we don't specify precisely what we mean by science and later by religion, then statements about the relation between the two become silly at best, sinister at worst. Personally, I am now at the point that if a popular writer makes some sweeping statement about the new science and spirituality, I have no idea whatsoever about what they might mean, and all I feel certain of is that they don't either. Since this entire anthology is, in fact, devoted to the theme of science and religion, I don't see that we have any choice except to examine very carefully what we mean or can mean by the word science and the word religion. My somewhat dreary editorial task, then, for the next few pages is to play the role of linguistic analyst, the most banal of all philosophic activities. I shall try to make the operation as painless as possible. Start with science. As I said, we are free to define science any way we wish as long as we are consistent. But it seems to me that at the very least we must distinguish between the method of science and the domain of science. The method of science refers to the ways or means that whatever it is we call science manages to gather facts, data, or information and manages to confirm or refute propositions vis-a-vis that data. Method, in other words, refers to ways in which science, still unspecified, manages to gather knowledge. Domain, on the other hand, simply refers to the types of events or phenomena that become or can become objects of investigation by whatever it is we mean by science. Method refers to the epistemology of science, while domain refers to its ontology. Let me give a crude analogy. Say we are exploring Carlsbad Caverns in the dark of night. We take a flashlight with us. That is our means or our method of gaining knowledge or of shedding light on the various caves. And the caves are the different objects or domains that we will investigate or illuminate with our methodology, with our flashlight. One cave might contain buried treasure of gems and gold. Another might contain nothing but mud and bats. The point is that the same flashlight might discover very different types of objects, and we don't want to confuse these objects simply because the same flashlight was used to find them. Instead of asking vaguely, what is science, let us therefore ask, what is a scientific method and what is a scientific domain? As for scientific method, general science texts seem to be in agreement, a method of gaining knowledge whereby hypotheses are tested instrumentally or experimentally by reference to experience data that is potentially public or open to repetition, confirmation, or refutation by peers. In bare essentials, it means that the scientific method involves those knowledge claims open to experiential validation or refutation. Notice that this definition, which we will accept for the moment, correctly makes no reference to the domain or objects of the scientific method. If there is a way to test a knowledge claim in whatever domain by appeal to open experience, then that knowledge can properly be called scientific. This definition, correctly I believe, does not say that only sensory or physical objects are open to scientific investigation. That would be like claiming our flashlight can be used in only one cave. There is nothing in that definition that prevents us from legitimately applying the term scientific to certain specifiable knowledge claims in the realm or domain of biology, psychology, history, anthropology, sociology, and spirituality. Indeed, that is exactly what the Germans mean by Geist science, the science of mental and spiritual phenomena, and what we Americans mean by the human or social sciences. The point is that because this definition correctly concerns only method and makes no reference to object domains, the dividing line between scientific and non-scientific is not between physical and metaphysical. The dividing line is between experientially testable and non-testable or merely dogmatic pronouncements, the former being exposed to confirmation refutation based on open experience, the latter being based on evidence no more substantial than the because I told you so variety. If science were restricted to physical sensory object domains, then mathematics, logic, psychology, and sociology could not be called scientific in that the central aspects of those domains are non-sensory, non-empirical, non-physical, or metaphysical occasions. There is a way, for instance, to test the truth value of a mathematical theorem, but this test is based not on sensory evidence, but on mental evidence, namely the inward experience of the mental coherence of that train of logical propositions, an inwardly experiential coherence that can be checked by the minds of other equally trained mathematicians. An inwardly experiential coherence, not correspondence, that has nothing to do with physical sensory evidence. The correspondence, or lack of it, can also be tested by reference to evidence, either mental or sensory, as the case requires. The point is that test by experiential evidence does not mean merely test by physical sensory evidence, a point we will soon elaborate, and that is exactly why mathematics, logic, psychology, and so forth are properly called sciences. Having seen that scientific method applies to experientially testable knowledge claims as opposed to non-testable dogmatic proclamations, which may be valid, but on grounds we will have to call by something other than the term scientific, we can now ask to what domains then is the scientific method applicable. But let us ask first, what domains are there? That is, what realms of experience or modes of being or aspects of reality are even available in the first place to which the scientific method may or may not be applicable? In other words, what ontology shall we accept? How many caves are there in the universe that we may go on exploring with our flashlight? I am not going to make a long drawn-out argument over this for the purposes of this presentation. I shall simply assume the basic ontology of the perennial philosophy. Nor am I going to haggle over terms God, Godhead, Absolute, Ultimate Being, Spirit, Life, Consciousness, Psyche, Soul. Those terms can mean pretty much whatever you want them to. My purpose lies in a different direction. Here, then, is our working ontology, the so-called Great Chain of Being. Running up the diagram, I have appended a general name to each domain. Running down the diagram, I have listed a representative discipline that generally, but not necessarily exclusively, takes as its object of study that particular domain. The numbers refer to simply the levels, and the letters I will explain in a moment. I might also mention that some versions of the Great Chain give anywhere from 3 to 20 or more levels. This simple 5-level scheme will adequately serve our purposes. The general meaning of the terms matter, life, and mind might be fairly obvious, but let me say a word or two about soul and spirit. The soul realm, as I will use the term, refers to the realm of Platonic forms, archetypes, personal deity forms, Yidman, Ishtiva, angelic patterns, and so forth. In the soul realm, there is still some sort of subtle subject-object duality. The soul apprehends being, or communes with God, but there still remains an irreducible boundary between them. In the realm of spirit, level 5, however, the soul becomes being in a non-dual state of radical intuition and supreme identity, variously known as gnosis, nirvikalpa, samadhi, satori, kensho, jhana, etc. In the soul realm, the soul of God commune. In the spirit realm, both soul and God unite in Godhead, or Absolute Spirit, itself without exclusive boundaries anywhere. Already, however, we run into grave semantic difficulties with the word spirit, for there is virtually no way we could discuss the realm of spirit without involving paradox. Spirit itself is not paradoxical, it is, strictly speaking, beyond all characterization and qualification whatsoever, including that one. Because spirit is, so to speak, the ultimate limit of the nested hierarchy of being, it enters our verbal formulations in apparently contradictory or paradoxical ways. This becomes problematic, however, only if we forget to include both sides of the paradox in our verbal formulations. Let me give a few examples. Notice that each level in the Great Chain transcends but includes its predecessors. That is, each higher level contains functions, capacities, or structures not found on, or explainable solely in terms of, a lower level. The higher level does not violate the principles of the lower, it simply is not exclusively bound to or explainable by them. The higher transcends but includes the lower and not vice versa, just as a three-dimensional sphere includes or contains two-dimensional circles, but not vice versa. And it is this, not vice versa, that establishes and constitutes nested hierarchy. Thus, for example, life transcends but includes matter, but not vice versa. Biological organisms contain material components, but material objects do not contain biological components. Rocks don't genetically reproduce. This is also why, for example, in the study of biology one uses physics, but in the study of physics one does not use biology. Thus, life transcends but includes matter, mind transcends but includes life, soul transcends but includes mind, and spirit transcends but includes soul. At that point, however, asymptotic at infinity, we have reached a paradoxical limit. Spirit is that which transcends everything and includes everything. Or, in traditional terms, spirit is both completely transcendent to the world and completely immanent in the world, and there is the most notorious and unavoidable paradox of spirit. On the one hand, then, spirit is the highest of all possible domains. It is the summit of all realms, the being beyond all beings. It is the domain that is the subset of no other domain, and thus preserves its radically transcendental nature. On the other hand, since spirit is all-pervading and all-inclusive, since it is the set of all possible sets, the condition of all conditions, and the nature of all natures, it is not properly thought of as a realm set apart from other realms, but as the ground or being of all realms, the pure that of which all manifestation is but a play or modification, and thus spirit preserves, paradoxically, its radically immanent nature.